Hey, this message is to the Dalai Lama. This is David Wood. I made a message actually to you a while ago. I think you saw it, and this is going to be my second message. And when I did the message the last time, I talked about how you could restore Tibet by reimagining the universe, essentially. Okay, which you already know, and I think a lot of the people in Tibet already know. And that was a great video, but I took it down because I was taking down a bunch of my old videos, and so I wanted to put up a new one. And I wanted to go into a little bit more detail and elaborate about, how to do that through time reorganization, perhaps. And for a little bit there, I want to talk about why you should figure it out. And I know you've been working on this for a very long time, and I'd be happy to help. And also how to essentially, walk everybody in the Tibetan people through enlightenment. Because I know not everybody there is enlightened. However, probably is about the highest concentration of enlightened people there are in the world, I think. And so uh, let me talk about first though why. I've mentioned this many times in my blog, and I believe you read my blog occasionally. And my blog is theteachingsofkingdavid.com. And I've also mentioned, in several of my other YouTube videos that a really big war is coming, and that that war is essentially going to, it's going to fill the whole earth, right? And it's going to get pretty violent, and that's going to be the war that people have against the Nephilim. Now, some of the nations of the earth will figure out how to either create peace with the Nephilim, and the nation of America will figure out how to do that, and then other nations will follow suit, and they'll kind of have their own world, and we'll have our own world, and we'll have to segment our worlds apart. But the reason is, of course, because the Nephilim are here, which the Nephilim are, I believe that you would know what those are, the aliens in the Bible, which are really, they're genetically modified, who are not really people anymore. They're more subhumans because they've been genetically modified by Satan. So they're more like walking demons. And the Nephilim are very strong. They move very fast. They have all sorts of advantages. They kind of operate from a single mind. Enlightened people can do this too, just by thinking about it, but like they do it through technology. And so because of that, there's going to be war that's going to be in most of the places on the earth. Now, I believe Tibet needs to be restored very, very soon to protect the Tibetan people, and also give them a safe haven that will be safe away from the war. I actually think that Tibet will be one of the most peaceful places on earth, very similar to how Costa Rica will be. Costa Rica will be the safest place on earth, and I believe Tibet will be one of the safest places on earth because of the philosophy of Tibet, and also the philosophy of Tibet that, for example, will bring to the Costa Rican people. And so, just a little bit about, how I ran into you. I've been reading about you my whole life since I was a kid, since I was first interested in meditation, which was like, I think, when I was 7 or 8 years old, I just kind of started meditating on my own. And then later I had a major spiritual awakening, my crown chakra opened and whatnot. But how would you take the nation of Tibet and reorganize it to where how do you restore it, right? This is the question. How do you actually restore Tibet? Well, the approach that most people would take is they would take the approach of doing it the way that everybody else does it, which is trying to work with China. And the problem that you're going to have is until the empire of China is restored, which China will be an empire. It will not be a communist party in the future. Okay, the emperor of China will actually be a guy that's, funny enough, a Russian guy. But in any case, in the future, China is going to be in empire. And when China is in an empire, it will be a righteous empire. And the righteous empire of China will have no problem with Tibet. Okay, and that'll be in the future, but I don't know exactly when that will be. And it won't be for a while. It won't be before, essentially a bunch of violence and war is poured out of the earth from karma, from humanity mistreating animals, and from humanity mistreating each other and mistreating the children and not feeding people that are starving children and not taking care of the oceans and the trees. These are all our dominion. We need to take care of these things. And so the karma is essentially going to cause an outpouring of war. And that outpouring of war is very important to get the Tibetan people out of, because they're supposed to be they'll be like an example of how to protect yourself and how to stay out. So I mentioned before that if you got enough people that were enlightened in Tibet reimagining history together, you would probably have to train them to do this for a little while, and it would probably take a lot of discipline to do. And there's multiple ways you can do it. For example, you can lead people to enlightenment in the traditional way that you've been doing for all your incarnations. I have another weapon, another sort of weapon that opens up the crown chakra, and well, the crown chakra will open up in somewhere between 3 days and 6 months. I had, for example, one of my friends, Matthew. He took actually 6 months to blow open his crown chakra, but his emergence of duality really began in about 3 days, right? And another one, for example, Paul, his crown chakra opened up right away. And women, I've had it all open up right away, right? For all the women that I've worked with, I've had their crown chakra open essentially right away. And so there's a faster way that I've got. I'd be happy to talk to you about it, and I'd be happy to help you with. But you would need enough people with their crown chakra opened up, okay? And then there's multiple ways you could do it. I think you could probably do it with about 10,000 enlightened people, because we're talking about a massive time reorganization, and time reorganization is actually, it's quite easy to do if we depend on God to do it. And it's you can still do it if you imagine it, like if you just like the way that I learned to reorganize time is there's the dimensions of consciousness that I describe. Okay, yoga can open your crown chakra for a long time, Andrew. If you come to see me, I can open your crown chakra probably in a few days, right? So I've described before the dimensions of consciousness, right? The dimensions of consciousness. Here's the thing, though, that I want everybody to understand. Not everybody is always ready to have their crown chakra open, but I like the way of enlightenment that gets people to enlightenment, and then they figure out what to do with it, right? I don't like this way of taking forever to get there, right? And the reason is because we don't have time anymore. However, there's some advantages and disadvantages. For example, in traditional Buddhist practices, people are much more prepared for enlightenment than they are doing it my way, right? So sometimes people are not prepared at all for enlightenment when it happens, right? Because it just it hits them like a ton of bricks, and then they've got to learn how to deal with their spiritual energy. They got to learn to deal with the deceptions, because the spiritual energy, it opens up in a much more fluid way when you have your crown chakra open, right? The spiritual universe it's an open book when you have your crown chakra open, right? You can see it in a totally different way, and it's kind of funny with me because my third eye still isn't all the way open. It is, but it's not totally open. And my crown chakra is totally open. Still, we're always progressing. I'll just say that, right? So that just like hit me like a ton of bricks, which is not necessarily the order that things normally happen. But yes, yoga can open your crown chakra. 30 years of meditation can open it, and I've got a way of doing it in like a week, depending on the person. So you get about 10,000 enlightened people, okay? And let me give you the two to three ways of doing it, okay? Get about 10,000 people. Number one, they would have to fixate on long meditation, a very concentrated way, on the past, and switching something actually in the past, right? So what you do is, Tibet got overran by China. I don't remember how long ago, right? Plant medicine around an enlightened teacher, Andrew. Like, you're not going to have the same result necessarily on your own as you will around an enlightened teacher. You need to be around an enlightened teacher, because plant medicine can also cause you lots of damage. If you take plant medicine, for example, in some of the shaman circles, a lot of shamanism descends from human sacrifice, and so there's a lot of demonic energy that leaks in, and that's what happened to me. Actually, the reason I'm not with my wife right now is because of some dark energy infiltration that we had after we went to some shamans and took plant medicine. So it's not just plant medicine; it's plant medicine taken in a proper context with somebody that is liberated from the demonic realms. And that's going to enable you to be in an environment where your crown chakra can open right up. So anyways, you have the crown chakra open up, and that allows you to manipulate space and time. And obviously time emerges from the imagination. So there's 4 main dimensions of consciousness that I can perceive. There is the what I call the I am dimension, which is all of consciousness is quantum mechanical energy, right? So you have the I am dimension, and I'm explaining time reorganization, specifically the Dalai Lama. I'd be happy to explain this more, and I'm sure you know how to do this in different ways as well. He's been reincarnating for a very long time. So I describe this as the I am dimension, which is all of consciousness that exists in the past, present, and future. And then you have a step down from that. You have something called the flower of life dimension. The flower of life dimension is in current time. So the I am dimension is in all times at once. The flower of life dimension is in current time. So what happens is if you go back up to the I am dimension and switch times, you can go down to the flower of life dimension in a different location in time. And then you can move into the spiritual dimension, which is what happens next. The flower of life dimension is like, it's like I describe it like a Tibetan mandala of energy that's both male and female. And one consciousness would have, it could have thousands of spirits, it could have trillions of spirits, and they would all have one consciousness, but they'd be different spirits. Okay. So this is a way that I perceived it, right? So you have this, and then you have the spiritual dimension below that, right? So then we have the physical dimension, and this is where we are. So we're here meditating in the physical dimension. And what we do is we hook our consciousness into the I am dimension. We move times, and then you move into a different location in time, into a different physical location in time. Okay. And then you change something that you do, or you change something that the people do in that different location in time. Right. And you could do that just by imagining it. However, it's very, very, very difficult to do. It takes a tremendous concentration to do it that way. Right. There's another way of doing it, and that is by asking God to do it. Right. And asking God to do it would happen through the principle of agreement when there's large amounts of quantum mechanical energy. So Jesus said, wherever any 2 or 3 of you agrees touching any one thing, it will be done for them by my Father which is in heaven. Right? That's what he said. Now, the problem that Christians have in general is they don't believe that that's actually true. Right? And because they don't believe that it's true, they don't get the results that they want with those things. Or they try to ask for something that that really is not in alignment with the will of the Father, for example. Like they might ask for something that God either doesn't want to give, or that violates somebody's free will, right? Like asking God to change somebody's mind over and over and over and over again about something that they want to do, right? And God would be like, well, that this person, had an opportunity to change their mind and they chose to do it this way. Tough luck, right? And that might not be the best thing to hear, but that might be what happens, right? So, for example, that would be if you're asking him to do that. But time reorganization is actually very, very, very easy if you just ask God, or if you utilize the spiritual force of a name like Jesus, right? And so what you do is you operate on asking in the principle of agreement. And the more people who agree to something, who are in the right spiritual states in particular, the more likely it is to happen. Now, here's what I've found in actually carrying this out. When I've gotten people to agree on stuff, it's generally happened. But when I get people to agree on stuff when there's a lot of quantum mechanical energy there, it like always happens, right? Or something like it happens, right? So, for example, how do you increase quantum mechanical energy? Meditating for a few hours before you do something, okay? Om chanting would increase quantum mechanical energy. I like there's a mantra that I do where I Shainai Masara Shanti Ra, all right, that I made up that I like to do. You could do mantra meditation. You could do, you could do Om chanting. You could do prayer. Like a lot of Christians, they walk back and forth and they pray and they get in the spirit moving from the part of their heart, and then after a while, there's like an outpouring in spirit. And another way of doing that is, of course, medicinal plants. For example, like an example of medicinal plants would be peyote, something like plant medicine, something with dimethyltryptamine in it, and MAO inhibitors, that increase quantum mechanical energy about more than anything, especially if it's made right with Acacia Confucius, Aryan Rui seeds, and just blessed. No shamans involved. Anyways, you increase quantum mechanical energy. Now, the increase in quantum mechanical energy, what does that produce? Well, what that produces is faith. So it says in Hebrews, for example, that says that there's a scripture that says in Hebrews 11, Hebrews 11:1 says this. It says, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. So what's the substance of things hoped for? Well, this has to do with the brain works, actually. The substance of things hoped for is actually serotonin, okay? Serotonin, as in the feel-good chemical, the chemicals that make you feel good, okay? These are the substance of things hoped for, okay? The evidence of things not seen, what is the evidence of things unseen? Natural hallucinogens in the brain. Well, your brain produces fairly large amounts of dimethyltryptamine, which is a natural hallucinogen that if you do, for example, you do meditation on your third eye or whatever, your brain will produce tons of dimethyltryptamine after a while. And one of the ways of increasing your quantum mechanical energy is increasing your dimethyltryptamine levels. So you can do that also with, for example, plant medicine, right? Which is how I came to enlightenment. I came to enlightenment through the plant kingdom, not through the teachings of Buddha, right? And then later, I started studying the teachings of Buddha, and that's what I'm doing now. So in any case, if you increase the quantum mechanical energy that is produced in the brain and the heart, you increase the quantum energy that's there, right? Then with other people with a mass increase in quantum mechanical energy who are also enlightened, what you do is you would, for example, stand in a giant circle, put your hands on each other's heads, like, to the left, like this. And then, everybody's putting their hands on each other's heads. And then somebody would lead a prayer, right? And then everybody else would repeat it. And their repeating of the prayer, right, will be the agreement that God needs in order to actually do what you're asking to do. So, for example, it's very possible that you could get enough people around. I don't know how many people this would take. It would probably take a lot of people in Tibet doing it at once. And even if they weren't all with you, right, they all meet in small groups where they're at, and you do it on a giant web conference or something like that, right, like a Zoom hangout or something like that. And then what you do is all of you at the same time ask for something that's very, very, very wild, right? Like, for example, what could you do? You could change history to where when Tibet was invaded, it was never invaded. You say, well, how would I change it to where it was never invaded? There's a lot of ways to make it to where Tibet was never invaded and the people were never kicked out, right? For example, you could have cloaked the existence of Tibet from the evil people that were in China that were trying to take Tibet out, right? That's one way that you actually could have done it. You could cloak it. Now you could also, you say, well, this happened in the past. Well, the past is also just a figment of the imagination and emerges from the time organization of the universe, right? And the time organization is malleable in the universe. So time can be reorganized by simply asking for it, right? Now, another thing that you could do is you could put a quantum field around Tibet and just make it to where anytime somebody tries to come into it with malicious intentions, they're just teleported to the other side of Tibet and they can't ever get in, right? That's another way you could do it. Now that you say that sounds a little bit bizarre. Is that really possible? Absolutely, that's possible, right? That's one of the kinds of things that the ancients used to do to protect themselves against the Nephilim, for example. Nephilim come running at them, and then they're at the other side of the city, and they don't know how they got there, right? Because the city, the energy of the city won't even let them in, right? You say Andrew Christensen said about lecture. I used to be, because I didn't understand them, but LSD actually causes damage in the brain, whereas there's a plant kingdom form of LSD that would actually be in, for example, the peyote plant, okay? And the peyote plant, it comes with other phytochemicals that balance that out, and it doesn't damage the brain. Does that make sense? And so it's the same thing, only the plant kingdom makes it, and it doesn't damage the brain, right? There's another form of, there's also LSA in nature, which I don't think is as strong as LSD. But it could be concentrated to be probably as strong as LSD, and that would be extract of plants, and that also doesn't damage the brain. And so everything that a man can make, for example, like MDMA, for example, I believe is some kind of hallucinogen, but it's not. It's definitely not healthy for the brain. Okay, my brother and I have talked about this. There's a natural chemical that's like it in nature. That the natural chemical that's in nature, it comes with plant ingredients, and those plant ingredients they balance out the consciousness in the brain, and they're plants, they're food. They're actually listed as food in the Torah. So, for example, the Torah says you can eat all of the herbs yielding seed, for example, which would include basically all of these things, right? They're fine. They're actually fine to eat, and the ancients used to use them. I'm telling you, Moses used them, Jesus used them, and others. Because what hallucinogens do, let me explain what they actually do. The reason why people, when they take hallucinogens, they generally have wild experiences is because what hallucinogens actually do in the brain is they hook onto receptors in the brain. And when they hook onto a receptor, there's a chemical breakdown of the hallucinogen. That chemical breakdown produces quantum mechanical computing in the microtubules of the brain. The quantum mechanical computing in the microtubules of the brain, then because the consciousness is quantum mechanical energy, that's what it is, then the brain connects. This is how consciousness works. The brain connects into the spiritual dimensions from hallucinogens. That's actually how consciousness works in the brain. Right now, that's not all the way that consciousness works. For example, there's energy, there's energy use in the brain, there's sugars that you eat that produce energy in your consciousness, there's exercise that affects your consciousness. Consciousness works in all sorts of different ways. But what happens is that the hallucinogens in particular, they hook onto receptors, there's chemical breakdown. The quantum mechanical computing then increases the quantum field of what's called the soul, which is the energetic layer that exists between the body and the spirit, right? So when the quantum field is increased, okay, what happens is there's massive neurogenesis, for example, dimethyltryptamine shuts down all the inflammation responses in your brain and turns on every single neurogenesis response at the same time, proven scientifically. Actually, the scientific studies say that dimethyltryptamine behaves less like a drug and less like a hallucinogen and more like a neurogenesis agent. And people say that it's the strongest natural hallucinogen there is, which is DMT, which is actually not true. It is a neurogenesis agent. So, for example, when you meditate for hours, you produce large amounts of natural dimethyltryptamine. The ancients used to take dimethyltryptamine and these herbal medicines like food all day long. All day long they would take it. Different ones, right? Because they'd balance out and rest from one and take another and stuff like that. I would do that if I had access to them, I'm sure, right? But it was like food to them that needed to be balanced out. So what happens is in the beginning phases, when somebody is utilizing plant-based, something that has plant-based hallucinogens in them, in the beginning phases, what happens is that person produces images and all sorts of stuff like this that appears as if the person is hallucinating, right? Which is actually not what's going on. What actually is going on is you are producing lots of neurogenesis, and the brain growth is making you see images. The quantum mechanical computing in the brain growth is making you see images. And when your body is used to your brain growing like that, your brain just grows and it just increases the amount of consciousness you have. It does not, mark my words, it does not cause you to hallucinate like that. The only reason that happens with the shamans, for example, is because they go and they take it, like once a week or something like that, or once every 2 weeks or once a month or once every 6 months. So your brain isn't used to the brain growth, right, for long periods of time, right? And then what happens is that they take it, and so they hallucinate. I don't have any hallucinations whatsoever. You say, well, Dave, where are you getting this information if it's not hallucinations? These are not things that I see. What happens is I can detach if I want to, and I can do this without taking anything because my crown chakra is open. I can detach my spiritual consciousness from my eyes, and I could look at my spiritual consciousness, and then I could look into the spiritual universe. Now, when I do that, the problem with that is that I've got to sort through information that's true and not true, which sometimes takes me some time, and it took me a little while to learn how to do that. And I still sometimes have information coming to my head that's inaccurate, right? However, right, what happens is eventually everything that I say will happen actually winds up happening later on. Like if I'm talking about the future or something like that, my prophecies are never wrong, right? They always happen, right? Because it's the increase in quantum mechanical energy that allows you an energetic framework, right? And I remember what the ancients used to do with plant medicines, right? From previous incarnations. I remember it. They used to eat it all day long like food because it made them unbelievable. It increased their strength to an unbelievable degree. It increased their intelligence. It sped up their consciousness. This is what they used to do. Right. So anyways, I hope that helps you understand. But in any case, that's one method of increasing quantum mechanical energy. For example, that the Dalai Lama might not like very much. Right. Because he comes from a different world and a different teaching than what I come from. Simon, David, I'm not the Buddha. You know what I mean? I have a different way. And I'm also learning the way of Buddha because the way of Buddha I find very, 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 very useful. Okay. And I have great love and respect for the teachings of Buddha. However, my way of doing things is much faster. However, his is more whole over a period of time. So that you balance the speed with the wholeness, and you have something that can essentially recreate a person in days. And that's really what we need. We need a balance between wholeness and speed, right? So in any case, what you do is you can put your hands in a circle, for example, and there's a prayer I could have you say. You just ask me what it is. I'm not going to do it here. And then everybody agrees on that prayer, and God takes time and reorganizes it and reorganizes space and time, and everybody just appears back in Tibet, and it never happened except for you all still remember because two realities merged and collapsed into each other. It's actually, you could do that, for example, probably if you got 10,000 people meditating for 3 hours and then all participating in groups of at least 3. So you have 3 people in each location, right? And literally Tibet would have never been taken over. What would happen is that either China would just not, the Emperor of China would just either not be aware of it, and it would be like a story of this holy city, and they could never find it when they went to find it because it would be hidden and cloaked, right? And then the advantage of that is that when the Nephilim come, okay, they can't even get into the city because they just move around and all your people are safe. That's the main reason why I'm telling you this video, is because the prophetic warning has got to be there. The people are not. You got to keep the people of Tibet safe. They're holy people. They're the most. They're one of the most important peoples that there are in the world. The people of Tibet, because the people of Tibet are the most nonviolent, most peaceful people that have ever lived. Period. Right. And this is important to humanity, and it's important to them. So yeah, you do that with a spiritual energy. You could do that. You could do that, for example, in the name of Jesus. You could do that. I could show you how to do it. And I've used things like this, for example, to teleport backwards in time. With my friend Matthew, we were driving in a car. We were late for church. We teleported backwards in time an hour and a half just by asking God to do it. That would have been much more difficult if I would have had to imagine that happening to do it, right? But if I asked God to do it, who has a much more powerful imagination than mine, and then we reorganized time, and then we ended up getting to church still about 10 minutes late because we had a hard time finding it. But we actually moved backwards in time an hour and a half, okay? Just by agreeing, because it says if any 2 or 3 of you agree as to touching anything done for them by my Father who's in heaven. So what if you get 1,000 people agreeing on something? Well, he does it for all of them, all the people that are agreeing, right? So you get the whole nation of Tibet, and this is going to work a lot better if all those people have their crown chakra open, which is actually very easy to do over a very short period of time. I could actually do it with you through an event called Enlightenment Week, which I actually would like to talk to you about, because if we mix your teachings with what I'm doing there, we have a way of bringing people to enlightenment, right, really fast, right, and then also having the solidity of the meditative teachings, there at Enlightenment Week. And then they go home with the meditative teachings and the habits that bring them back into society and orient them, right? And then we open all their crown chakras. And when all their crown chakras are open, They have ability to manipulate the universe more. Therefore, the faith. So once again, faith is the substance of things hoped for. The hope, right? The substance is serotonin. You feel good. You produce serotonin, and then you get that electricity feeling. And then you have the evidence of things not seen, which is the vision. And when you're seeing that vision in your mind, your brain is producing natural hallucinogens, right? That's what's projecting the hologram in your brain into the universe. And so when you have a higher amount of those, your brain, once your brain is adapted to reality, and once your brain is actually connected to reality, that increase in quantum mechanical energy actually will move reality, and other people can see it who you don't even describe what you're doing, so it's not hypnosis. All right, I'm done. I hope that helped. Somebody send this to the Dalai Lama. I'll email it to him, and I appreciate you all very much.